Right. Welcome everyone. My name's Harris, and I'll be introducing the talk on badgers, pine martens, and the wildcat tonight at our evening wildlife watching hide. So, um, yes. Uh, Here's a little montage of the three top animals that we'll be talking about tonight. So you've got badgers on the left, Pine Marten at the top right, and the wildcat at the bottom right. Just to give you a bit more of a flavour of what we're going to talk about tonight. So, what is our evening wildlife watching hide? Well, it's one of our biggest main attractions that we have here at Speyside Wildlife, and one of the reasons for that is, well, the reason is that you get an opportunity to see three uh, normally quite elusive mammals here at the hide: badgers, pine martens, and sometimes a Scottish wildcat. Since 2023, we've had a Scottish wildcat around, which is absolutely amazing. It's no longer a pipe dream to see a wildcat. It can actually happen here. Um, so a little bit of a history of the hide. It was once a potting shed for gardeners back in the days when it was a plant nursery, and it was founded in 1938 by a man called Jack Drake. He used to have like a hobby business here. He would clients would buy plants by mail order from all around the world, and he would send plants to them. Then it was around about the late 40s, 1940s. It was given over to a guy called John Lawson, who then handed it over to the current owners in 1999. And from 2002 to about 2016, it was like a locally acclaimed tea room, which was known for its excellent cakes. And it had a little conservatory so that you could take refreshments and look at birds and squirrels as you had refreshments. Um, if you fancy booking yourself onto the hide, I have included the short link here. If um, anyone wants to do it, it's right there. So this is the interior of the hide. As well as hosting our evening wildlife watching hide, we do hold master classes uh, and ID courses here as well. We've recently done one on waders, and we're going to be doing another ID course later on this week. Uh, we also this is inside the sort of conservatory area. This is looking at it from the left hand side. This is looking at it from the right hand side. And you can see that there are radiators which we have on mainly in the winter months because when the winter is here, it can get very cold. So this keeps people nice and comfortable. This is again outside view. That's one of the platforms that the Pine Martens have used, but I'll show you the other one, the main one, in just a moment. Another outside view. So those log bridges are are sometimes what the Pine Martens use to get around without having to come down to the ground. Although these days they tend to come down to the ground because they're a little bit bolder when it comes to being near the badgers, but they still have to keep their distance from them. So there's another picture, and then that's the main platform where the Pine Martens like to be if they choose to come in. You've also got a view out towards the surrounding fields if there's any deer, like red and roe deer. So just to give you a, a little bit of a panorama of sorts, a sort of a point of view shot, if you like. Uh, that's what it would look like if you were really there. So let's start off by talking about one of our most reliable mammals that we have here at the hide, the badgers. Um, they come almost every night. I mean, not guaranteed. Sometimes in the winter months it can be a bit cold for them, which can mean uh, that they don't come out as much because although they don't hibernate per se, they do like to sleep through cold periods. Although you might get a few that decide to brave the cold and come out anyway. But round about now, um, with conditions warming up, we're getting the whole badger family around just now, and this is four of them. And this is another one, another shot of badger coming in, and another. So it's looking very handsome. This is taken from the badger photography hide. That's another summer attraction that we have. This is for people who want to photograph badgers in more daylight conditions, so that if you don't want to photograph things through the glass in the hide because the windows there, because they're like conservatory windows, they don't open. So this gives you a chance to photograph things without glass, and it looks a little bit more natural as well. The setting, and this is the sort of scene that people get when they're at the photography hide, and yeah, you can get get very close encounters with them. Uh, a little bit of an overview. When I first started in 2022, there were initially about eight badgers, and then some of them had cubs, and that rose to an all-time high of about 11. As time has gone on, however, it's gone down to about six, so about two males and four females. And I think, well, quite a few of the badgers we know have been hit by cars. Some may have just moved on because they wanted to, but we do now have about six. So a few facts about badgers. They live in groups called seats, and their burrows are called setts. And they've got like multiple entrances, or at least the ones in Northern Europe do. Uh, in the in Northern Europe, especially Britain, badgers are very social. So that's why they can live in groups of between 2 to 23 and have territories of between half a square kilometre and 0.2 square kilometres. So they don't need a lot of land to live, a badger family. And the main reason for that is because they eat worms, but they also like to eat mice, voles, cereals, and mushrooms. They can also prey on rabbits, but I think when that happens, they tend to just dig them out from their burrows. They're not really able to catch fast moving prey otherwise. They're not like a fox or a pine marten. They can't give chase to fast moving prey. So worms are what they like best. And their sense of smell is excellent. It's about said to be about 600 to 800 times better than ours. Sometimes they've been referred to as earth pigs, because their sense of smell is good, and they also forage a bit like a pig, I guess. Even the terminology used to describe males and females is similar. Males are called boars, and females are called sows. So yeah, over time, people have thought that in medieval times, people thought they were a kind of bear, and which is not hard to see why, because they've got big claws. I remember when I grew up, there were some CDs I used to have that described them as a kind of dog. Uh, but now the consensus is that it is a kind of weasel. The second biggest weasel in the world, actually, second biggest weasel species in the world, which is our Eurasian badger is the second largest weasel in the world after the Wolverine. But it is also the world's largest badger. There's about six species in the world, and the Eurasian one um, is the biggest of them all. Um, they're black. The iconic black and white faces that they have. They're believed to be a form of what you call aposematism, which is where you use bright colors and or patterns to appear threatening to predators. Essentially, it's believed to be war paint, something to make a predator stop and think and give the badger time to escape. Um, but because, of course, they do have predators, or not in Britain anymore, but in other parts of their range, they do still have predators like bears, wolves, lynxes, wolverines, and if there's enough of them, they can fend off these predators because they've got very strong jaws. Like their bite force is very strong. Um, it I don't think they need it for their diet, although it probably helps for some aspects of their diet. But they definitely don't need those jaws for worms because they just slurp them up like spaghetti. They'll go looking for them, like especially when it rains, and they slurp them up um, to get at the juiciness of them. They don't want to bite the worms in two because if they do that, then they get the grit in the stomach, which they don't want to taste. So yeah, they're one of our mainstays here at the hide. So the other animal that's also very important for us, and sadly we don't see these every night, but we do get them pretty regularly. These are pine martens, which is another member of the weasel family, and we get these, maybe about 2 or 3 nights a week thereabouts. Um, so if we can get one, they're always very popular. We have about two at the moment, a male and female. Um, so what I've done here is I've included individuals that I've known, pictures of individuals that I've known since I started here. So this is actually these two on the platform here are the very first male and female that I came to know. So the one on the left is the male, and you can just about see the spot pattern. This one had like a double or a triple spot pattern, and then the one on the right is a female, which was slightly smaller, and it only had one spot on its bib. And these were the two that I knew when I first started. This is again that same female. Uh, and I think this was probably taken in the winter because you can see the leaves behind it are there's no leaves in the branches behind there, and it's also in its thick winter bushy coat. Whereas when you look at it like this, these two are in their more in their summer coat, which is a lot leaner. And when they're in their summer coat, the size difference between them uh, is not so pronounced. Whereas in the winter, the size difference between them becomes more apparent. The male's about a third bigger than the female. And this is another shot to show the single spot on the bib that marks this particular individual. It's not a universal indicator to identify males and females in general. This is just this is just the pattern of this particular individual. This is the later male that would appear after the original one disappeared. The original female, she was found dead along the road, so a new female eventually moved in to uh, replace the first one. I think this is the male because you can just about see the spot pattern. Yes, and I think this is the one that we've had ever since. This is the female, and to bring it up to date, this is the current pair. So the one on the left is the male, and the one on the right is the female. Uh, so this is the current male and female that are here, and you can see the size difference a bit more clearly here. So a couple of facts about pine martens. Um, they mainly like to eat mice and voles because they're quick and fast moving animals. They can eat a variety of different berries. In fact, sometimes when you see pine marten droppings, sometimes they can be they can have the color of them can show you what kind of berries they've been eating, if they have been eating berries, that is. So I've seen ones that look blue when they've been eating bilberries. So that can be a pretty interesting indicator of what they've been up to. They'll eat nestlings, birds' eggs. They can also eat ground nesting birds as well, and both red and grey squirrels. Um, it's an interesting case that because for the red squirrel, the pine marten is a natural enemy, but but they can escape them more often because they are faster and they can escape onto the thinner branches, which is something that the grey squirrels can't do. They're not as fast, they're a bit slower, and they're too heavy to be supported by the thinner branches. So the pine martens prey on the greys more often, and that's one of the reasons why grey squirrels are not so widespread in Scotland, especially not in the Highlands, because they tend to prefer deciduous woodland anyway, and uh, and they prefer deciduous woodland anyway, and the pine forests, of course, have more pine martens, so this is a more hostile place for them. They're territorial as well. You know, the males have about 5 square kilometers and the females about 2.5. And as a rule, the the longer it takes for your prey item to replenish, the bigger territory you need to compensate for that. So the reason why badgers, for example, can make do with very small territories because there's usually plenty of worms underground. They can't overexhaust their supply of worms easily, whereas pine martens, despite the range of things they can eat, those things could be more easily exhaustible, harder to come by. And as such, that might be one of the reasons why they are largely solitary animals. They only come together to breed, and the male just leaves the female to raise the young by themselves. Sometimes you might see the female with like kits, and they can have between about 2 to 5 kits, with about 2 to 3 being the average. Um, a little bit about the history. They were once widespread throughout the UK. Like it was said that in the 1500s you could get them on the outskirts of London. But there was a combination of persecution and habitat loss. So in Scotland, for example, um, the advent of grouse shooting estates meant that predators like pine martens were getting persecuted uh, to the point where they were lost from just about everywhere except the remotest parts of northwest Scotland and Ireland by the beginning of the 20th century. Eventually, though, the world wars, well, both world wars saw a decrease in persecution because gamekeepers would have gone off to war. But then after the Second World War, it never the persecution never the same anymore. Plus, the advent of non-native plantations, which were planted to try and replenish the timber um, lost after the Second World War, they became more widespread, and this allowed the pine martens to expand back into the areas where they'd been lost. So it's a major success story, really. One that seems to have happened by luck more than anything else. But today, Scotland is very much the stronghold. There's about 4,000 pine martens in the UK today, and 3,700 of those are in Scotland, with a couple in the Kielder Forest in Northumberland, some in Wales. In fact, some of the Scottish ones have been introduced there to try and help the Welsh ones. And as far as I'm aware, the Irish ones have held on pretty well, so they're still there. So overall, it's looking quite good. And the other thing I'll say before we move on about their reproduction rate is that their numbers crash so easily because they only produce 2 to 3 on average. Um, they couldn't bounce back from the persecution the same way. So not having persecution around definitely helps. So now we have our, well, in my what is in my view one of our star attractions, but by far the most unpredictable of all of them, and it's the Scottish wildcat, which is by far one of our most iconic mammals. It is an actual native animal. It's not just an adjective to describe a cat that's just, rogue. It is an actual wild animal that we have had in Britain since the last ice age. These would have coexisted alongside things like woolly mammoths, for example. Uh, it's one of our last remaining predators, and the one that has suffered in some ways the most out of any of them. We don't have very many native predators left. I mean, we've lost bears, we've lost wolves, we've lost lynx. So things like this are very precious to us. This is a picture of it that I took in the summer of 2023 or 24, I think. And it's just going about its business. And you can see people often ask, what's the difference between wild cats and domestic cats? And the answer to that is that they're about the same size, but the wild cat is quite a bit chunkier. It usually has more stripes instead of spots. The tail is thick and club-like and has like distinct black bands around it, which you can just about see there. And overall, I think the wild cat has a more serious expression. It doesn't have like the wide-eyed, innocent look of most domestic cats. I personally think that the wild cat has a more serious look, and they're not tame by any means. They can be quite vicious when cornered, and their ferocity is actually what I've heard that Celtic tribes used to take inspiration from them. I think some people had names that were related to the wildcat because they were renowned for being ferocious, which was possibly an essential quality to making sure that the Romans didn't come any further into Scotland, which they didn't, not very much. So this is another picture that I took at night, and you can see under its where its neck is, you can see there's like something yellow, and that's its old satellite collar that it used to have. It doesn't have that satellite collar anymore. They took his off him because he had to be neutered. He was part of a reintroduction program, which I'll talk about a bit later on. Um, but they took his off him because he had to be neutered, and the reason he had to be neutered was because he had like a genetic fault inside him that meant that he wasn't considered suitable for release. But no, not release, for breeding, because any offspring he had would have inherited it, which would have been disastrous for the breeding program. But otherwise, he is free, and we've had him since 2023, and long may we have him. He's been absent recently. I've seen him along. Um, I've seen him in the local area, but I hope that he'll return at some point. This is the same again, slightly closer picture, and again you can see the collar. And this one I can get reasonably this one I can get reasonably close to because having been raised in captivity, he is somewhat used to people more than you would imagine, which is good for observing him, but it's it's maybe not quite the norm that you would expect. But hey, that's what makes him very popular, I guess. This is another picture of the same individual. Can't remember which year I took this in. I think this was probably either 23 or 24. Um, but you can see just how you know special he is, how beautiful I think he is. There is supposed to be another one in a neighbouring territory that I have seen at the Hyde once before, and the reason I knew it was a different one was because that one had its collar, and whereas our one doesn't have his collar anymore. And I think I've heard it rumored that he might this other one might be a brother of this one, um, but I'm not entirely sure. But that's I've only ever seen that one once, and he hasn't returned to the Hyde since. So a couple of facts about them. Um, as for their diet, they prefer to eat things like rabbits and hares, both of both brown and mountain hares. So they'll also take things like mice, voles, birds, and red squirrels. The reason I know that those two prey items is because I've not witnessed this personally, but the owners of the house, the owners of the property, say that they have seen this wildcat um, take birds and also take red squirrels. Um, in terms of territory size, like pine martens, they are territorial. They have to continually patrol their territories in order to, well, just eat well, essentially, but also to just scent mark their boundaries just to keep intruders out. Because what happened was when we lost our female pine marten that I knew, what happened then was that um, there was no female for a while, and then eventually a new one moved in because they must have a sense that uh, that that territorial boundaries are not being maintained. They must have a way of smelling when um, when they haven't been maintained in a while, um, and then once they are confident that that individual is no longer there, a new one will move in, which is what I think might happen if something did happen to our wildcat. I imagine that the same thing happen, a new one would just move in. So they got to keep on top of the territorial boundaries constantly um, to to just make sure that they have the territory that they want. Um, Contrary to how it might appear in some photographs, I mean, quite often you see photographs of Scottish wildcat in the heart of Scots pine forest. But it's slightly deceptive. They prefer, in truth, they actually prefer woodland edge habitats next to maybe rough grassland and moorland. I've seen our one from the hide. Even from the hide, it's possible to see our wildcat hunting in the fields beyond, and I have seen him catch a vole once, which is kind of satisfying to know that he can hunt for himself, um, because that's what it's all about. Uh, a little bit of history about wildcats is that, again, like most things, they were once very widespread in the world. Well, they still are widespread in the world, but in Britain, um, you know, but by the 1850s, they were lost from England and Wales again because of uh, grouse shooting estates that would have persecuted them to try and keep the number of grouse higher than it would be. And eventually they were confined to Scotland as well. Um, but again, similar story to the Pine Marten. They got to recover um, in the World Wars because gamekeepers were off to war. And after the Second World War, um, there wouldn't be quite so much persecution after that. Uh, but we actually had, I think it was in the 1960s and 1970s, that was deemed like the golden age of for the wildcat. Like they were elusive. They've always been elusive, but at least they were, doing well from a conservation standpoint. Interestingly, the wildcat wasn't given proper legal protection until about the 80s, like the beginning of the 80s. Um, so that that meant that you know we're still to see the full impact of that, because round about that time onwards, through the 90s as well, the population began to decline again. But this time, it's not just the loss of habitat that's to blame, but there is also the threat of domestic cats coming in. Because I once asked the question once when out when at the Highland Wildlife Park where they do the project, and I asked how come the hybridization is such an issue now, considering that even beforehand people would have still kept domestic cats as pets. And the reason is that eventually, when people began to get more affluent and have holiday houses, um, development expanded into wild areas that had previously been untouched. Uh, so that meant that more people moved in. There's less habitat for them, but on top of that, they bring their pet cats into those areas, and of course, they're allowed to wander. And when they do wander, they meet our wildcats and they interbreed, and then they produce hybrids, which means that the species begins to just diminish. Um, in Europe, I've heard that hybridization is less of an issue because in Europe they've got a greater choice of other wildcats to mate with, whereas here they don't. So that's why they mate with domestic cats more, and that's why you get more hybrids. So a little bit about the project itself, um, because this is an important part of the story here in their recovery, is that there'd been monitoring groups for wildcats for quite some time, and by about 2019, the conclusion was that there were only about 30 left in the wild, and these were not thought to be self-sufficient, not self-sustaining, and that they're going to go extinct unless something is done about it. Luckily, though, we have kept a substantial captive population. We've had an awareness of the issue for a while, and we have kept a large captive population. And 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 essentially, well, the most important one has been at the Highland Wildlife Park, which is itself part of the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland. Um, it's one of about two parks that are members of this. The other is Edinburgh Zoo, but the Highland Wildlife Park began a breeding program to try and boost the numbers of wildcats. So what they did was uh, they had an enclosure away from the public where they fed the wildcats, gave them medical care, and then eventually, when the time was right, they took them into a another enclosure in a woodland somewhere nearby, and discreetly opened the door and let them figure out for themselves that they were free. Uh, and then what happened was they realized this and they started to come out. And most of them, I heard, stayed close to the release site. But there was the famous one that was tracked going over the top of Ben Macdui and into the D side part of the national park. So that's the southern end, and it was seen in a place called Mar Lodge, which has a lot of nice pine forest and moorland. Um, so that one was very distinctive in that way. And then our one, um, he came to us in about the end of 2023, and we've had him ever since. My first encounter with him was like in the winter of that year. We'd actually gone out for like a staff outing to the Highland Wildlife Park to see the project, and while I was driving, I saw what I think would later turn out to be one of the wildcats that was released, but I dismissed it at the time because I thought, well, it's got a collar and it's next to a road and it doesn't seem that afraid to be there. Um, and then came back home after the end of the day, was sitting in the minibus having a moment to myself, and then the wildcat walks by, and I, you know, want to see. It's just a shadow at this point, so I just turn on. I try to turn on the lights, but don't think to not put on the engine at the same time. So I put on the engine, and then it darts across and doesn't let me have a good look at it. But but I've had multiple encounters with it since, a lot better encounters with it, and it's been a feature of the hide ever since. He comes and goes. Sometimes he'll be away for a week or two while he patrols his territory and looks for food. But the idea is that he always comes back after after a while to hang out here. Um, and yeah, I'm just wondering what's up with him just now because I it's been a little while since I've seen him, but hopefully he'll come back. So yes, so that's basically another reiteration of that story. A couple of miscellaneous things that we see at the hide. Here is wood mouse, which we often see um, sneaking out to grab peanuts because they're always mindful that there are badgers and pine martens about, and of course the wildcat. So they got to be very fast to get at the food. And you can see that it has, well, one of the things that distinguish this species is that it's got large ears, um, yellow fur, and it's got an unmarked white belly. There is a similar species further south called the yellow-necked mouse, which is said to have like a yellow W pattern. But this one has no such pattern. So I think further south, wood mice and yellow-necked mice can occur together, so it can present an identification challenge. Whereas here, there is no yellow-necked mice. So if you see a mouse like this with big ears, a white belly, and a reasonably short tail, you can be confident that you have a wood mouse. That's another one. This is it. This is it on the Pine Martens platform, um, daring to try and steal peanuts and sultanas right in the place where the Pine Marten likes to come in. This is a bank vole. Again, we tend to see these relatively later in the year, uh, and not as often as wood mice, but they also do the same thing as the wood mice. I think the two species don't get on though. I have seen a wood mouse actually fly at a bank vole as if to attack it. It resembled it looked a little bit like a ninja when it did that. But yeah, they otherwise seem to coexist all right. But I think they try and keep out of each other's way. Um, this is another mammal that I've recently seen at the high. This I managed to see at the end of in the autumn of 2025. I think it was about October and September and October. And this is a pygmy shrew, which is actually like a really tiny little mammal. Um, so tiny that it looks no bigger than like a birch leaf. You know, it's tiny, and I was most delighted to see it because it's not very often that you see a new species of mammal. The wildlife of the hide doesn't change very much. So when you get something completely new like this, I do get very excited. We do also have tawny owls. Again, more often heard than seen. They make the distinctive twit-twoo noise, but occasionally you do get lucky and you see one come in properly, as this one did, and so did this one. I think they don't like the light. That might be one reason why they don't come in as much. This is a barn owl. Again, we tend to hear these more often than see them, but you can sometimes get lucky. We see roe deer down in the fields below. We also get red deer, which is the larger of the two, and our um, largest land animal. We do also get treated to some very interesting night skies. You know, we get the skies are very clear. We also get you can see multiple constellations. I've shown guests Jupiter and its four moons through the scope. And we have on one occasion had we have sometimes had the aurora borealis or northern lights as we've exited. So that's another thing that I can show guests if it's the sky's not cloudy. And that's about it. So uh, if anyone has any questions, so we'll move on to questions in a bit. But otherwise, thank you.